Good morning. Good morning. It's been a hectic week. This past Wednesday, we started our Wednesday night Bible study. Most of you guys were there, and this is a class that you actually have to sign up. But we started, and thank you so much for coming. This Friday, we had a huge turnout for our house church, and we had a great time. Again, Don, your prize awaits. It was a $20 prize, but I went to CVS and they didn't have a $20 one. They only had a $25 one. So you have to give me a $5 refund back for the start. But it's very exciting, and I'm kind of sad to end the series, but I'm looking forward to next week when Pastor Long begins his series. Again, he's an amazing teacher, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I am very looking forward to his message. Let me start out by giving you some stories. A man drives 100 miles an hour in a 45 miles an hour speed zone. And because he's driving so fast, he loses control, and he flips his car on a sharp curve, and he critically injures himself. Who does this man blame? It was the Department of Transportation for not making the degree of banking on the curve great enough to keep you on the road at 100 miles an hour. A man is wearing a shirt, and after he wears it, he realizes that he needs to iron his shirt. So instead of taking it off and ironing the shirt, what does he decide to do? He decides to take the hot iron and iron the shirt while he's wearing it. And in doing so, he burns himself. Who does he blame? He blames the maker of the iron. Because they said, you should have put a warning label on the box saying you shouldn't iron the shirt while wearing it. You pull through McDonald's, I'm sure you heard of this story, and you order some hot coffee. And as you drive out, you're trying to eat your Egg McMuffin and drink the hot coffee at the same time. And what do? You spill the hot coffee on yourself and you burn yourself. Who does this man blame? He blames McDonald's for making the coffee too hot. Your TV's on the fritz, so you decided to fix the TV yourself. But without unplugging it, you begin to work on it, and what happens? This person got shocked and electrocuted. Who is to blame? He blamed RCA, the maker of the TV. Because the maker should have let you know that if you do this, you could get shocked. Last one. A man decided to pull this stunt. And again, this is a true story. For some reason, a man wanted to see if he could swallow a razor. I didn't want to imagine. If he could swallow a razor down. Because I guess he saw it on television. Swallow a razor and see if it would digest and come out. He did it, and what happens? It got stuck, and he went to the emergency room. And they took an x-ray. And I don't know how he came to this conclusion, but he decided, you know what? The hospital needs to get sued for subjecting him to radiation during the x-ray process. You would not believe it if it were not true. But this is exactly the things that people do. Why do people do that? Why do people blame others for the mistakes that they make on their own? Again, as I continue my series, it is because it is a part of the fabric of sin that is part of all of us, deep down inside, from the very beginning, that was passed down to us from Adam and Eve. It is a sinful nature that is in all of us that leads us, that makes us want to blame others for the mistakes that we make. This is the reason why the relationships that we have in our family, with friends, at our job, that's why it's broken down, and that's why so many of us are unhappy. Let's go back to the book of Genesis. Again, It says, God made Adam and Eve and put them in the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, I'm not exactly sure, but it was probably the size of Korea. So it was pretty big. So when we think of the word garden, we usually think about the little garden that we see. It's not that type of garden. The garden was the size of a country. It was huge. And God told Adam and Eve, you are given the responsibility of taking care of the entire garden. You're in charge. This is yours. And he said, you can do anything that you want. You can eat from any of the tree. Imagine this. Not just a tiny garden. You can eat from anything in the size of Korea. Except don't eat from this one tree. So try to keep that in perspective. You can eat from anything from this entire garden, size of a country. Just don't eat that one. In chapter 3, serpent enters the picture and causes Eve to question what God had said. And after talking with the devil, and which is always dangerous to do, in verse 6 it tells us that when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and she ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. After eating the forbidden fruit, Adam looks at his wife and realizes for the first time that she doesn't have any clothes on, and notices that he himself is naked, and they hid from God, another sinful nature. They hid from a God who loves them and who cares for them. And that's what makes sin. That's what sin makes us do. Then in verse 11, God asks another direct question, and this is important. He asks Adam and Eve, he asks a simple question: Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? It's a very simple yes and no question. There's no vagueness here. Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from? Did you do it or not? It's simple as that. Did you do it or not? It doesn't get any simpler than that. And you would think that Adam and Eve would have a very simple answer, because it was a simple question. But instead of giving a simple answer, yes or no, what was Adam and Eve's answer? In verse 12, this was Adam's response to God's simple question. Adam said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree. And then at the very last, he said, and I ate it. The first person that Adam blames in this picture is, he blames his wife, Eve. What's really interesting that I want you to see is this. The wording that Adam uses in this verse. He says, instead of saying, my wife, Eve, gave me the fruit to eat, he didn't use that word. What does he say? He says, the woman. He didn't even acknowledge her as a wife. He says, the woman you gave me, you put here with me, gave me the fruit to eat. You know, this is actually a very common practice in which a person tries to distance oneself from another person by instead of using a real personal name, it uses some other words. Oftentimes, when people want to distance themselves, they don't want to use a personal name. They just say, this person, that woman. And that's what Adam was doing. And then he tries to put the sin squarely on his wife, Eve. And he said, she gave me some fruit. Remember, what was God's question? God's question was, did you eat? Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat? But then he goes off and said, instead of answering the question, he says, no. The woman that you put here, she gave me. And he says it in a way that makes it sound like that he did not have a choice. The reason why he ate the fruit was he didn't have a choice. It was because of the woman that you put here, and because she gave it to me. Can you see the just ridiculousness of this picture? God asks a simple question, did you eat? Did you eat? He says, the woman you put, she gave me. What we see here is Adam taking zero responsibility for his action. Just as it is common to place blame on those who are close to us, Adam does something even more incredible and perhaps also more common. Let me read to you this verse again, and I'm going to emphasize one word here. Listen carefully. Adam says, when God says, did you eat of it? Adam said, the woman you put here with me. Who is Adam blaming here now when you read it that way? Adam is now blaming God. God, if you hadn't given me this woman, I would have never done it. God, you created her. How often in our lives, when things don't go according to our plan, instead of examining ourselves, we blame God. It happens often, doesn't it? But the story doesn't end there. It keeps on getting better. In verse 13, this time Eve answers the question. What is this you have done? And Eve was no different. Again, instead of confessing to God, she blames who? This time she blames the serpent. She blames the devil. She says, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. Again, the question is, what have you done? What have you done? And instead of answering the question, what have I done? Again, we go around and say, the serpent deceived me. And then at the end we say, I ate it. I couldn't help myself. I went crazy for a while. In today's society, we have a name for every disorder, and we call it an illness. And I'm not saying that those things are not necessarily true and it's not valid, but labeling everything that we do as a disease often leads us to justify our actions instead of taking responsibility. This is the point. We have to take responsibility for our action. We can call what we do, we can create a name, we can label things, we can blame everything, but where's our responsibility? And that is the question that God is asking. When you look at this verses, technically, everything that Adam and Eve said in this passage, they're true. They're correct. What Adam said is correct. Eve gave him the fruit. And serpent did deceive Eve. But again, they left out the most important truth. Their role. God never asked who deceived you. God never asked who gave you this. God never asked who tempted you. God simply asked, what did you do? What did you do? What is your role in the sin? What is your responsibility? What is my responsibility? Eve ignored God's command. Adam joined Eve in there even though he knew the truth. This is the nature of sin that we must acknowledge if we want to live victoriously in our everyday life, in our everyday relationship, at home, with our parents, children, at work, or with our friends, in every part of our lives. This is the nature of sin that we must acknowledge and know that exists. First nature of sin, it tells us the tendency to blame others is deeply ingrained in all of us. We have to understand, every one of us, including me. And as I was preparing my sermon, I thought about all the excuses I made within the past 24 hours, all the people that I blamed. It is ingrained in every one of us. When there's a mistake and something happens, immediately the nature of sin wants us to blame others. Why are you late? Why am I late? I was late yesterday to our leaders meeting. The first thing I did, even though it was the truth, was I blamed others. Second, it tells us that left to ourselves, on our own, that we will do everything to avoid taking personal responsibility for our failures. When there's no accountability, if we're left to by ourselves, the sinful nature in us wants us to lead us to not take responsibility. That is the second sinful nature. The third thing it tells us that blaming others is often nothing more than a subtle twisting of the truth in order to take the heat off of ourselves. Just like in Adam and Eve, instead of taking responsibility, they take the little bit of truth from here, they take a little bit of truth from there, and what do? They kind of twist it around. So in the end, it makes it seem like our responsibility is less, that our fault is less, that our mistake is less. The woman you put here, she gave me, and at the very end, I hate it. Somehow, we want to twist things around to lessen our responsibility. This is the sinful nature that is in all of us, in me. And fourthly, it tells us that without deep working of God's grace in our lives and without God's conviction, all of us will do the same thing that Adam and Eve did in the garden. That every one of us, we need God's grace in our lives. We need God's forgiveness in our lives. Or else we'll do the same thing that Adam and Eve did in the garden. Wayne Dyer, he's a self-help author. He once wrote, and it's so true, he says, all blame is a waste of time. No matter how much fault you find with another, and regardless of how much you blame him or her, it will not change you. You may succeed in making another feel guilty of something by blaming him or her, but you won't succeed in changing whatever it is about you that is making you unhappy. When you blame others, I am sure when there's a mistake and if there's a problem, I am sure that other people is to blame. I am pretty positive. I'm looking at all of you, you guys are a good person. And I'm sure if something bad happened, if a mistake happened, I am sure that the reason for that, there's plenty of other people that needs to take responsibility. I am not denying that. I'm not denying that when you fight Oz, that Tiffany, probably went crazy. No, she never does that. That's why I picked her as an example. But this is what this author is saying. It doesn't matter whether other people have problems. Blaming other people, it says, it will not solve the problem. And what the author is saying here is, blaming other people, it will not solve you. And in the end, it's not going to make you happier. And I thought I was meditating on this quote, and it is so true. I'm just like, no, I take that back. I'm worse than probably most of you in blaming people. Ask my wife. But one of the things I realize is what this author said is absolutely true. When I blame other people, it did not make the situation better. It did not make me better. And lastly, I thought about it. Did I become happier after I started blaming people? It didn't. Actually, it made it worse. I became more angry. We need to take responsibility and stop playing this blame game. Let me share with you clearly why Adam and Eve were responsible. Number one, Adam and Eve, they both knew the rules. They knew the rules. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, the Lord God warned him, "You may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat of its fruit, you will surely die. Adam and Eve, they can blame each other, they can blame Satan, but they also must take responsibility. Why? Because from the very beginning, they knew the rules. They knew what was right, they knew what was wrong. When I fight with my wife, when I raise my voice, even if my wife was 100% at fault, you know what? I have to be responsible for raising my voice because I knew the rules. I knew what was right and wrong. Adam and Eve were responsible because they knew the rules. 2, they were responsible because they knew the consequences. Because he said, God did warn them, if you eat its fruit, you are sure to die. They knew that they would die physically and spiritually if they had disobeyed God. They knew what would happen. God didn't just give a simple label as, oh, don't do this. God even gave a clear reference. If you do this, this will happen. And the last reason why Adam and Eve were responsible is this. And this is most important. Adam and Eve were responsible. And we are responsible. Because they had a choice. Adam and Eve had a choice. They always had a choice. No being forced Adam and Eve to do what they did. In an article in a Reader's Digest, almost 20 years ago, there was an article called "It's Not My Fault." Pete Hamill, he actually coined this phrase called victimism. Victimism. This is, to me, one of the biggest problems that we have today. In our society, we see ourselves as a victim. What are we doing when we're blaming other people? We are the victim. When Adam said, God, the woman that you put here, when God blamed Eve, he became the victim. When Adam blamed God, he became the victim. When Eve blamed serpent, she became the victim. And this is the problem that we have in today's society. And unless we cannot overcome really all the problems in our relationships at work and family and everywhere else, unless we overcome this attitude of victimism. You know, in the Bible, in chapter 5, actually, I have to admit, I got this from another pastor, but I read this passage many times, but I never saw it this way. In chapter 5, gives us a classic story of this victim mentality. Let me read it to you. Listen carefully. Now, there is in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, a pool, a water pool. In Aramaic, it's called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, people who are crippled, blind, lame, and paralyzed people. One man was there who had been invalid, crippled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that he had already been there a long time. He said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. When you read this passage again, John chapter 5, it was almost identical to what I read in Genesis 3. This is a story about a man who had been crippled for 38 years. He was lying near a pool called Bethesda that was known to have some medicinal healing property. It was actually believed by the Jews, again, some people believe that an angel would come down periodically, time to time, and stir the water of the pool of Bethesda. And they believe that the first person that entered the pool after the angel had stirred the pool itself, that the first one that would enter would be healed. That was, what many of the Jews believed. And what people did was hundreds of people would wait outside the pool, and then they would, jump in here and there. And they wanted to be the first after the angel would, stir the pool. And I don't know how they determined that. And a lot of sick people and crippled people would go there because they wanted to be healed. And on that day, Jesus saw this man, and he asked him a very curious and subtle question. Do you want to get well? And first of all, this is a very interesting question. Jesus was not, it was a rhetorical question. That means it was not a question that, in a sense, that Jesus didn't know the answer to. Jesus knew why this man was there. Obviously, he was crippled. And Jesus knew about the pool of Bethesda. He knew why people would go there, especially the crippled people. So Jesus was not asking the question because he did not know why he was there. But Jesus was asking this question, why are you here? I mean, do you want to get well? Because he wanted to examine the heart of this man. Again, examine this question. Jesus said, do you want to get well? It's a very simple yes and no question. Do you want to get well? But again, look at the answer. It's so similar to the answer that Adam gave. What was this man's answer? Instead of saying, yes, I want to get well, his answer was, sir, I have no one to put me into the pool. I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. In other words, he's saying, while I'm trying to get in, someone else always gets ahead of me. No one will help me. People here are rude and inconsiderate. They only care about themselves. There is no system here for someone like me to get healed. I have no family. I have no friends to help me. Again, he plays the blame game. Instead of simply saying, yes, I want to be healed, all he does is start blaming everything else for his failure. Jesus asked this question because I believe he wanted this man to take responsibility. It's not easy to stop blaming others. Because some of us, it is so ingrained in our fabric now because we've done it so often. I love what Jesus said next. Jesus said to the man, he said, get up. He didn't say, oh, you don't have family? Oh, you don't have friends? Are you really? There's no one helping? No one? These people are rude? Jesus did not encourage this man to continue to make excuses. Jesus simply said, do it. You do it. Get up. Pick up your mat and walk. Amazing the words that Jesus uses. Don't blame others. Get up. Pick up your mat and walk. The underlying message here is that the power to overcome lies within our faith in God. Therefore, we have no need to blame others for our problems. This is a sinful nature that we must overcome. And I look at myself first and foremost. It's not a message to you, it's a message to me. So how do we overcome this sinful nature? The answer is simple. Always look in the mirror. Look at ourselves in the mirror. That's the first place to start. When faced with problems, when faced with difficulties, start by asking, what could I have done better? Or what mistakes did I make? Again, I'm not denying that there are other people at fault. There are other people to blame. But again, that's not how we're going to solve problems. It doesn't make things better. It doesn't solve the problem. And it doesn't make us happy by blaming others. So we have to ask ourselves, what could I have done better? What mistakes did I make? Listen to Matthew 7:4. It says, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? The principle is there. Bible always says, look to our own problems before we try to look at the problems of others. In Jonah chapter 1 verse 12, I love what Jonah said. He says, pick me. Jonah, he disobeyed God. He got on a boat. God was punishing Jonah, so he sent waves and waves, and people were like afraid of, that they might die. And this is what Jonah said. He took responsibility. He said, pick me up and throw me into the sea. It will become calm. I know that it is my fault. It is my responsibility that this great storm has come upon us. As a pastor, one of the many failures that I had as a pastor happened about 20 years ago. When I first graduated from my seminary, I served 1 year in the city of Memphis in Tennessee. I left after 1 year because I was miserable. I was sad. I failed. But I remember when I left Memphis that year, I blamed everything. I blamed the senior pastor because he gave me very little support. He didn't. We never hardly ever met or talked. He was just doing his business. And I said, he never supported me when I was down. I blame mainly the youth kids, some of them youth kids, who rebelled against me. I'm like, man, these kids, they're spoiled, rotten kids. I blame the city of Memphis for being so small and boring. And there was nothing in that city that helped me to, to be happy. A year later, surprisingly, I faced exact same problem, except I was in Houston, my hometown, with my family and friends. And I was serving at one of the largest churches in Houston. And yet, I was blaming the same thing for the problems that I had. I was blaming the pastor, I was blaming the youth kids, and I was blaming everyone else. It was then I realized that the problems that I had was not because of the bad youth kids or the unsupportive senior pastor or even the city. The problem was with me. And I knew that things were not going to change. Things did not change. And things will not change unless I took responsibility for the problems that I had in my life. And unless we take responsibility, I realize the same problem will always follow us no matter where we go. So today I want to ask you the question that God asked Adam. Where are you? Where are you in your relationship with your spouse? Where are you in your relationship with your parents or your children or your friends? Where are you in your spiritual growth? Are you walking right with God? And when God asks that question, God does not want us to answer by blaming others and making excuses for our problems. God wants us to answer His question truthfully. But more than that, God wants us to take responsibility, saying, this is my mistake. I made a mistake. Forgive me. This is a solution to the sin problem right here. We can overcome so many things by simply taking responsibility and stop playing the blame game. And these simple words, believe it or not, can do so much for all of us by simply saying, I messed up, God. I have no one to blame. I'm responsible, God. Forgive me, God. No more blame game. This is a sinful nature that lies in every one of us. Let us pray. with our eyes closed and heads bowed,